My name is Beatrice from the Africa Talk Show, and I'm here today with Carl Huhta, blogger and author of The Little Boy in the Red Sweater. Now, Carl, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Excited about getting to know a little bit more about this, why you wrote it, and just going through the journey with you over the next few minutes. Tell me, first of all, why The Little Boy in the Red Sweater?
So, The Little Boy in the Red Sweater is actually a picture of me when I was probably around 4 years old. So that came while I was writing the book. It's in the blog, but it was a wonderful way of tying in the blog character to the book, and it was a great title for it.
Okay. So the book came after a blog that you were already writing.
Correct.
Okay.
So I had started a blog in 2009 with no intention of writing anything about my childhood or anything that was very sensitive. And through that process, very quickly, it felt as though these words had to come out on a blog. And it turned into a dialogue, which turned into a story. And it was a unique way of telling my story to myself and then publishing it to make it real. And it was a therapeutic way of kind of getting it out of my system.
Okay. So before it transitioned into the point where you're like, I need to write the book, what were you blogging about? Like, what were your...
So it was, in the beginning, it started out with memories of my sexual abuse as a child. And so I was writing that out in a, between The Little Boy in the Red Sweater and then a voice, because that's how I was experiencing it. There was two people in my head talking to each other. So as it was happening, I would write it out.
Okay.
So as that, it just kind of organically kept going. And then I would start adding in my experiences with yoga. I do a lot of Bikram hot yoga. And I would have breakthroughs or triumphs in a yoga class or utter devastation in a yoga class. And then I would come home and blog about it. So it was never like I need to go blog because it's Saturday. It was always, oh my God, I need to go blog right now because this has to be on paper, if you will, and it needs to be clarified so I have clarity of what's going on. So I never knew in advance exactly when that blog was going to happen.
Okay.
So
the blog was more of expressing a specific moment or either something you had experienced during the day or something, maybe a thought.
yeah.
What brought you to that place where you're like, okay, this has to go on the blog?
So it would be sometimes a song. It would be
Okay.
sometimes a yoga class where it was good or bad. Sometimes it was after a 10-day Vipassana meditation course where I had huge breakthroughs. It was sometimes just with the frustration of trying to process and heal from sexual abuse. And that's what was put into the blog and then ultimately into the book.
What age were you when you decided that this was something you wanted to start, not just going through and trying to deal with personally, but expressing it through the blog? What age was that?
So that was in 2009, so 9 years ago. So I was like 45, 46.
Okay. So prior to this point, so the abuse started when you were roughly what age?
4.
4. So prior to that, how had you processed your experience?
And that's a great question. I did not process it. So I didn't have a lot of memories. I had images, I had feelings, I had strange behaviors that were not making any sense to me at all. So I didn't really have the realization that, okay, this is what I need to do to get healed. It's just that I remember surrendering at one point in my life. And I think once I did that, the pathways started coming. It wasn't pathways that I chose. It was something like a neighbor asked me to go to a yoga class, and I went with her. And I was horrible, and I hated it, and I never wanted to go back. And at the end of the class, I looked up, and everybody was very peaceful and happy. And I was enraged, and I was angry. And I looked around, and I was like, oh, it's all inside of you. So for some reason, I kept going back to yoga. because it felt good at the end, even though going through it was just very intense. And it was a complete emotional journey for me. Where most people do yoga, they do the asanas and they're always trying to perfect the posture. And what I'm trying to perfect is trying to get the most emotions out of my body so I could then function the next day and not have so much anxiety, PTSD to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. So tell us this, if we can go back a little bit more to that 4-year-old boy.
Okay.
How long did this abuse go on for?
It was just, in my memory, it only happened once.
Okay.
And to get to that memory, the actual photographic memory, took me many, many years. Because I knew there was something very deep and dark inside of me. I had to find out what that was, what was ground zero. So I didn't know it was going to be a photographic memory of a very detailed moment by moment of the abuse, where I was with my uncle in a sauna. I was 4 and he was whatever age he was. And when I got to that, it was a very, very difficult point. But it also started the healing process, because then I knew that I had found ground zero, but it was a long way from that point to here to feel so-called normal and heal as best as I am right now.
Wow. So as a 4-year-old, obviously you don't have the language, don't have the context to fully understand what is happening in that moment.
Correct.
So at what point, at what age, what season in your life did you start to have these memories and realize, wait a minute, something happened that should have never happened?
So it wasn't just my uncle, it was a neighbor, 2 neighbor boys that were older than me. That was also part of the abuse. And that abuse went on until I was in 10th grade in high school. So I had a long history of abuse, but at the time I called it like a relationship, because it's so confusing to differentiate between sexual abuse and love, because there's no one there to tell you the difference. And if that's all you know, you call it love. When you get enough to a vantage point where you can see that it's actually sexual abuse and your behaviors match that, then you make sense, and all of it flows from that point on.
So for years, you just assumed this was just people that you loved expressing love to you. This was normal. This was just a
This
relationship.
is normal. This was, I did feel anxious after most of the events, but it was someone that was paying attention to me, that was touching me and was so-called loving me. And I didn't know how to stop it, and I didn't know what to do with it. It was an anomaly in my life.
Did you have that sense that this was something that should be stopped, or maybe you just felt uncomfortable, like, well, I guess this is normal, but how did you process all of that was going on in that moment as a young boy?
So I lived a life as a child very anxious, and it was like a PTSD child, anxious all the time. So I was always in a heightened state of waiting for something to happen. In the book, I call it, being in control, but not in control. Like being responsible, but not in control is a better way of saying that. So I was responsible, but I was not in control of the way I felt. So I didn't have the words, I didn't have the language. It just came out in anger. It came out in low grades. It came out in low self-esteem. It came out in various ways.
Is there anything you turn to deal with this anxiety and the frustrations going on?
Today?
Even as, well, not today, but before you began this journey of walking through this and dealing with.
Yeah, I think what happened is I had to build a persona that was acceptable to society, while at the same time trying to manage the anxiety that was inside of myself. So others would describe me as fun, funny, nice, and at the same time I'm inside feeling the complete opposite of what they're describing me as.
Wow. Well, can you tell us a little bit more about your family? Your parents, siblings, how many siblings you have?
So I have 13 siblings, and some of them are here in Texas. The rest of them are back in Michigan. My father died in 2012, and my mother's 85, and she's still quite healthy and is living a good life.
That's good. It's good, Bessie. Was there any point growing up, and you have so many siblings around you, and I'm sure there's some that you were closer to than others. Was there any point where you felt maybe I should talk to one of them and see if, maybe just not necessarily because you knew something was wrong, but just like telling them of your experience because they're a good friend, a sibling, a safe place?
Yeah, it was something that was never to be talked about out loud to anybody from my mouth. It was not, it was that deep of a secret that I felt if it got out, it would amplify the anxiety, even if another person knew what was going on. It was a very tight position to be in because I didn't have the words, I didn't have the emotional stability, I did not have the spiritual understanding, and I didn't have an adult view of what exactly was going on. So it was one of my deepest secrets.
Wow. So even at a young age, you had that shame that was
Yes.
associated to it.
Shame is, Dr. Brene Brown describes shame as fear of disconnecting. And that's exactly how that feels. And when you are with a family, the one thing you don't want to do is feel disconnected.
Right.
So every time the shame would come up, I felt disconnected. And it was always trying to balance my position in the family while trying to remain normal. And nothing about me was normal.
So for a long time, you're going through your everyday life with the persona, so to speak, that everybody in the outside world sees everything's fine. You're this fun, outgoing person,
Correct.
almost as a way to protect them, like building a wall to protect the secrets, the shame that was hidden on the inside.
Yes, I call that the survival self, because at certain ages when you're being abused, the human psyche cannot interpret what's going on. So it protects you with the memories and it puts it deep into the psyche. And then what comes forward is the survival self that's saying, okay, here's the lay of the land. How do I get from point A to point B? How do I get to ninth grade? How do I graduate? How do I make a life of myself? At the same time, trying to balance the anxiety, depression, PTSD. These are all words that I didn't have back then, but looking back, I had that, and I did not have the medication or the tools that I had over the last 9 years.
Wow. So what happened? What was the experience or the moment? What triggered something within you 9 years ago for you to stop and think, okay, there was something in my past that happened and I need to deal with this? What led you to that moment?
Well, first of all, it was behaviors. I was acting out sexually with adults. I was drinking a lot. I was doing some drugs. I was doing behaviors that were not in alignment with my spiritual idea of who I should be. So I was trying to find this. There's something wrong, and the reason I knew it was wrong is because there was this darkness, this heaviness, and I went to yoga school, teacher training in California in 2003. It was a big dream of mine to be a Bikram yoga teacher, and I lasted 2 weeks. I woke up in the middle of the night in what I call now as night terrors. It's kind of like waking up in a dreamlike state, awake, but you're still dreaming, but you're in a highly terrorized moment where your body is shaking, you don't know what's going on, and you don't know what's causing it. And so after 2 weeks of continuous night terrors, I just said I don't have what it takes. So after that experience, I said I need to go find out what is causing this terror. And that's from 2003 all the way up till today, which is, 16 years later. I finally now have a firm grip on exactly why that happened. And I no longer have night terrors. I no longer have as much PTSD as I did, but it's all managed by yoga, it's managed by medication, managed by blogging, and just being aware that when I'm anxious, it's not real, and that I just have to let it process through my body.
So when you came to terms with your past and you started talking about it, how did your family, how did your parents specifically, how did they react to?
So they knew the blog was out there all along. I believe all of them did. Some of them read every blog. I remember my younger brother said he read every post yeah, which is really a beautiful thing. Others, I think, peeked at it, looked at it, and I had at one moment when my father was convicted of being a pedophile, the whole family blew up, and each one of us handled this in a very different way. So the ones that read the blog were probably curious on what's going on over there, but so I'm not sure exactly if they read. The rest of them have even read any of it or all of it. Two of my siblings have read this book already, and it was real beautiful.
Wow. So prior to the blog, there was no one-on-one conversations with family members or parents?
No, there was an older sister, my sister Beth, who I communicated with through most of this 9-year period. Her and I would share. She had a blog. I had a blog. We both had been abused, and we both expressed our way through our blogs and talked about it daily.
How did this affect your relationship? Because I'm curious, when something like this happens, especially with children, obviously sexual abuse is from someone close.
Yeah.
Most times. It's a relative, a close family friend, a neighbor. So when something like this happens, it obviously removes almost like a blind, a curtain is open to a part that maybe some people maybe suspected, some were like, I had no idea that this was an experience. So I'm curious specifically with your parents, how did that change the dynamics? Was it are you sure that happened, or did they come to terms with, wow, we believe you and we know that
So
happened?
they were already dealing with the charges and the ultimate not acquittal, but the ultimate sentencing of my father for his actions.
Mm-hmm.
They could only go back because the statute of limitations was 40 years,
Right.
so they could only go back to a certain point, and that in itself was so much that was going on away from me that I could barely handle what was going on with me. So at one point, I asked for space from my mother and from my siblings, and because I had to focus on myself, I couldn't take on what they were going through and what I was going through simultaneously. And it really protected myself, and it wasn't meant to hurt them. It was meant to create an environment for myself that I could heal in the most ideal situation.
Were you able to rebuild a relationship hopefully stronger than that was
Yes.
there before with?
Yes, with my mother especially. She's pretty much affirmed that entire book. I had a lot of anger towards her and my father, of course, and just anger at my uncle, anger at the entire environment. And it takes a lot to process that. You can say, I forgave her, but it was a 9-year forgiveness process. And it was mostly just listening to her and not trying to impose my story onto what she's telling me. What she did and has done is her story,
Right.
and I have my story here, and I was able to hear her the first time, and then we were able to build a dialogue that's safe, and it worked out really well for me, and I believe that's forgiveness.
Wow. When you say you forgave her, what did you forgive her?
I forgave her for not being the mother I thought she should be. So we all want our parents to be a way,
Right.
and I kept waiting for my mother to show up as this warm, cozy, fuzzy, nurturing figure, and she never was that way. And she admitted that to me. She's not that type of a person. So what I was expecting out of her was to someone that she's not even capable of or is. So when I finally got it, I said, oh, I get it. I'm angry and holding grudges against a person who does not have the ability to do this. So I let go of my story of who she should be, and I embraced the woman that she is as my mother.
Wow. I there's and I get what you're saying about you had an expectation. So
Yeah,
you had to realize that she couldn't be what you expected, your idea of who she should have
correct.
been.
Yeah,
But as at the same time, I have to wonder, being a mom, when you hear your child's perspective, because obviously she's there, so she
yeah.
knows what she sees, she knows what she knows. When you hear a different perspective, does she at any point feel responsible, like she could or should have done more to protect you, or and how did you address that to let her know that it wasn't her fault, because ultimately that was the decision and the action of somebody else that hurt
Correct.
you and
Correct. We just had long discussions about what I thought she should have done and versus what she thought or didn't know what was going on or didn't know how to handle what was going on, if she even knew. But I don't believe she knew in my case what was going on. But I had the expectation as a child that, can't you see that I'm out of control? Can't you see that I'm angry? Can't you see my grades are dropping? Can't you see? But she's raising 13 other siblings. It's a large house. My father's a pedophile. It's there's very little money. The social dynamics of it is not set up to be where the ideal could happen. It's happening now where I can have adult conversations with her,
right,
and she's affirming what I'm saying.
right. So do you feel like there were any red flags that either parents or siblings could have caught? And as far as from someone who's experienced this, what would be some of those red flags, if you feel like you saw them, that you would say for other parents to be like, and not just parents, but maybe older siblings that understand this more,
Yeah.
watch out for these things?
So watch out for what they call red flags. So if your son or daughter is acting, so-called normally, they have good grades, they're socializing well, everything's going as it's been growing in a very organic way to the age they are, and all of a sudden there's a change in behavior that's so unlike how they have been. A drop in grades, there's mood swings, withdrawing from family, withdrawing from friends, and the appearance of low self-esteem. And I think if parents can catch that, they need to ask the question, not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. And that comes from Oprah's. Oprah had a show on from a Milwaukee social worker that she said was an aha moment for it. And it is for me too, because when you say what's wrong with you, right away you're stating you're wrong.
You're wrong.
I'm telling you that you're wrong, and if I was you, I would do a much better job of acting than you're doing right now. So if you say what happened to you, it opens up the space where you can then say, I'm feeling anxious. I don't know why. Some words would come out versus what's wrong with you, because when you say what's wrong with you, I'll say nothing's wrong with me.
Right.
It's a very defensive, and we don't know what's wrong with us. I mean, it's not like someone says, you've been molested. You don't even know what molestation is. You don't even have the words for it.
Right.
So
It took you a little over 40 years to come to a point where, because of obviously a series of events, you started realizing all these different things going on in your life. You're like, okay, I have to obviously face something that I'm not quite aware of what it is right now, but there's something there.
So the emotional pain is so hard to describe in the book and right now. The emotional pain that I was in, the anxiety was so high. The PTSD was very active. So I am very acutely aware that this is not normal and that I need to find whatever path, whatever teacher, whatever medication there is. And I discovered this over a long period of time, what worked and what didn't work, to manage that. And by going through all those different paths of yoga, meditation, medication, and so on, I found my way through the darkness.
For someone that's still trapped in that shame, still hiding behind the wall, a defensive wall of protection from their experiences, the shame that may have attached because of that. What would you tell them would be the first step to walking through that journey towards freedom from that?
First of all, tell somebody you trust your story. And it may be a friend, it may be a friend from school, somebody that you trust that will allow you to tell your story to. Mm-hmm. Start there and then start asking for help in whatever capacity that means for you. If your parents are open to, going to a therapist, mm-hmm. start there. If your parents are open to you doing yoga, go there. Whatever feels like is your mode of expression, writing, blogging, writing poetry, mm-hmm. painting, whatever that means, so you can have a way to express the pain without causing further injury to it yourself and to the people around you.
I do want to ask, because this started from a blog, and I love that just going through this, it's done in a journal entry type way. It's dated and you have the different experiences from that day. Why did you choose this approach when you decided to turn this into a book?
Because that was my story. And one of the editors wanted to change it into this and move it this way and change this blog and put it over here. And I said, no, sexual abuse is the way I've written it is the way it feels. It's not always in a straight line. It goes from one extreme temperament to these very highs and these lows, and it was a chronological diary of exactly how I felt at the time, at that date, and I didn't intentionally want to write the book. That was not my that's not the reason I started writing the blog, as you know, and I didn't always think it was even worth a book. But the thought came to me that if you want to be of help, to anybody that's out there, you're going to have to share your story. And the way you share your story, in my experience, was to take the information I had and put it into a book and then promote it as much as I can and get the word out there. The biggest message I want people to know that are going through this is there is a way through. There is. You will not be stuck.
That's good. Glad to hear that. I feel like a lot of people need to hear that. As you were growing older, how did that experience change or shape that relationship that you had with that? Not just that uncle, but just other relatives around you.
So you learn to, I think what it is that you believe you are the molester. You believe that you're part of this, you're the sinner, you're dirty, and nothing you can do is going to take this away, even though there are some attempts through religion and other things to change the inner dynamics of yourself. Mm-hmm. I didn't have a relationship with him, but I was able to work through to a point where I could see why he did what he did. Mm-hmm. And he's actually kinder to me than I was to myself. Because in my memory, he did it once, and what I did to myself from that point on, as an adult, choosing negative behaviors, were equal to what he was doing. I was abusing myself sexually with other adult men. That was way more severe than what he did for me. So it's those kind of moments you realize that blaming a person for it does not really get you anywhere. It keeps you in a victim mode, an angry mode, and you need to find a way, or at least I needed to find a way through that, those tough emotions.
So just from your journey, from the moment you decided, and from the first day, I guess that's journaled here, to the very last day, for someone that will grab a copy of this book and read this, what are you hoping will be the result? What are you hoping will be the connection between a different person, whether it's someone that has not had the experience of any kind of sexual abuse in that way, or someone that has? What are you hoping would be the connection between the two?
So I had a few friends that I've given this book to, one person who has been molested, as a child, and one person who has not. And both of them came away affirmed that, there is hope on one end, and that, yes, what you're saying is exactly how I felt. It's exactly, you're saying it exactly the way it was, but I never thought of it that way. And it's affirming your feelings, which are never affirmed by anybody other than another survivor or someone that can hear and see you. So I'm hoping that the ones that have been abused can relate to my to the story itself and the challenges that I went through. They're probably going through as well. And for people that have other traumatic experiences, it's finding a way to find peace within yourself after living a tormented life for most of our existence.
What would you tell your 4-year-old self, knowing what you know now and the journey that you've walked through now? What would you tell your 4-year-old self? What would you tell your 14-year-old self? And what would you tell your 24-year-old self?
So my 4-year-old self is, I see you and I hear you, and it's not your fault. 14-year-old self would be, it's still not your fault. You were not the aggressor. You didn't start the sexual abuse. You had no tools to stop it. You had no tools to voice the opinion or voice it to anyone. I didn't feel safe enough to tell anyone. Not only because of the shame and the embarrassment, a teenager doesn't want to admit that they're different, number one, and bring out something that's so, especially back in that time, in the 70s, that's not even talked about. Where would they go with that information?
For someone who you say you had that wake-up call, that moment where you looked at your life and you were just acting contrary, like what you say, contrary to what you believed you should have been.
Yeah.
So for someone who maybe is in that moment where maybe they haven't even recognized the root of that yet, and they've turned to one thing. A lot of people, when they go through traumatic experiences, turn to one abuse or another, whether it's alcohol, sex, drugs, whatever it might be. So for someone that might be caught up in that moment where they know that they're not themselves, but they don't know quite yet, is there something you can tell them to say, hey?
So in my experience, a person, when the student is ready, a teacher will appear. And I don't know what that is for every person. I believe at some point, enough pain will make you move and change in a different direction. Or you will continue on and you will die because of the inaction you're taking of something that you're not responsible for, but you need to find it within yourself to find your freedom. Because if they look at themselves and they look at their life, and everything around them should be a loving experience. The person you're with, their friends, their behaviors should be loving towards themselves. It should be that way towards others. If it's someone is beating you or sexually abusing you, that clearly is wrong. And I know it sounds like that's common sense, but for a lot of people going through the process, believe that they are either lovers, they're getting attention, they've been threatened. There's so many scenarios that got them to believe they are now co-conspirators of the act that's happening. They have to remember they are children. They were children, and what happened as a child is going to manifest itself in very negative things as an adult if not addressed as a child or as a young adult or as an adult.
And for parents that maybe the kids at a young age are able to say, this happened, or what would you say also having experienced it? What do you, almost like in hindsight, what do you wish you could have said to your parents? And what do you say now as an adult would be the best reaction to that?
For the parents to the young kid would be to acknowledge, we hear you, we believe you. We will take steps to make this right. And we will hold that person accountable, and we will protect you from this point on. It will get you the help that you need as you move forward.
I want to quote from the last chapter in your book, and you can help me out with the name. The mind creates the abyss, the heart crosses it.
So that's a quote from the Sargadatta. He's a Indian sage that died in 1999 and wrote a book called I Am That, which really helped me a lot through this process. But what he's saying is the mind creates this vast open space where all this chaos can come in and happen. And that is the mind that's actually doing it, because when I was going through this, it was mostly happening in my mind. And I could differentiate between reality and my mind. Like I was either in the past or in the future. And you can only be in reality in the now moment. And I was constantly being dragged on both sides. So the abyss he's talking about is a place where the heart comes in because you prepared him room for it to come in.
That's good. So I do want to ask this: what now? So you transitioned from the blog, you published the book. What now for you? Where are you in this journey? What now? Is this, okay, this is out there, I have dealt with this, I'm fine, moving on? Or is this a journey you continue to walk in?
No, this is the beginning of finding my voice, my true voice. So what I plan on doing is promoting this as much as I can through social media, interviews, and talking about it to anyone that'll listen. And it's a story, it's my story, and it's something I know quite well. I believe it will help a lot of people.
So, well, thank you so much, Carl, for sharing.
Thank you, Beatrice.
I definitely had gotten into the book, and I'm excited about finishing it. I'm grateful that you were able to share your journey. A lot of people say, and we spoke about this briefly before, that you know that you're completely healed when you can tell your story without crying.
Correct.
And we did talk about how sometimes if you share your story and the crying can be from different things behind those tears.
Yes.
But I'm grateful that we were able to just sit here and talk. And I believe what was an open and honest, very vulnerable conversation that may not always be an easy one to tell, not implying that you are completely over it or not, but just the fact that this is your story that you are now sharing with the world.
Yes, it's still a journey. I don't claim that I'm healed. I don't think I can claim the way forward for all sexually abused children, adults. But it's a starting point for somebody to pick this up and see if they can relate to it in any way, shape, or form.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. One more time, the book, The Little Boy in the Red Sweater, is available on Amazon. This is a great book, y'all. Go order it, read it, and the greatest hope from this conversation, from this book, is that this will lead you into your own journey to freedom from your experiences. And maybe it's not something you experienced, but hopefully help somebody else that you know around you. So thank you for being here, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you. You're welcome.